Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and it's Aubrey Plaza's death from Agatha All Along the face every Marvel character who died in the MCU saw the moment they died? Death does come for us all, this series confirms, and since death escorted both Alice Wu Gulliver and non-witch Nicholas Scratch, we must assume that every character with a soul in the MCU, witch and non-witch alike, were ferried to the afterlife by some form of this character. In this video, we are gonna revisit the most significant deaths in the MCU and recontextualize death's role in them. Now that we know it's not just an abstract feeling, but death's hand in yours that takes you on that path. We're also going to determine if Aubrey Plaza's IMDb just got 10,000 times longer, and we're going to figure out how busy death actually was during the blip, and I think we can actually pinpoint the moment when Tony Stark saw death waiting for him. And if you loved Rio Vidal in the series, we have an amazing Lady Death shirt available at nerdright.shop, which will make an amazing holiday gift for that special nerd in your life. So let's talk about death in the MCU, how this character really works. Introduced as Aubrey Plaza's Rio Vidal and Agatha All Along, initially Rio Vidal was the Green Witch, a member of Agatha's coven on the Witch's Road, but in episode 7 she reveals her true form to Lilia Calderu as the skull-faced Lady Death or Mistress Death of this cinematic universe. And while it seemed like Lady Death could have only taken that form on the Witch's Road, no, back up on the surface, the world of the MCU, that's where we get to see that amazing skull face. The show's costume designer Daniel Cellon has spoken a lot about Death's various costumes on this series, how, as the Green Witch, the costume embodies an active mycelium fungal network with a spider on the shoulder. Head writer Jack Schaefer told The Wrap that it was important to the writers for this version of Death to be death and life in constant conversation. We didn't want Death to be destruction, to walk by things and they wither around her, to embrace the neutrality of nature and how it's beautiful and fierce and terrifying and uncaring, but also can hold you and fill you. Hold on to that thought of Death's connection with nature, because I think it's actually important to how we see Death in the MCU. And the costume designer went into more depth about his costume design's origin from the Marvel Comics.
She is actually Death itself. In every costume that she wears in the show, we show a little bit of her ribs because we wanted to call attention to a silhouette that's introduced in the comics.
The image shown in this video comes from 2017's Ben Reilly Scarlet Spider #7. It's arguably the most feminine Death has ever looked, but one key detail is maintained: the hooded skull face. Death's first appearance in Marvel Comics as an embodied character was in Captain Marvel #26 in June 1973, a story that follows Thanos' conquest of the universe, which he does to prove his love for Lady Death by destroying all of life. In this storyline, he would obtain the Cosmic Cube, but later Jim Starlin would continue this storyline in the early 90s Infinity Gauntlet crossover event, in which Thanos obtains the 6 Infinity Gems and succeeds in snapping away half of all life, which of course inspired the Infinity War film. It's just worth remembering that in the Marvel lore, death is not something specific to Earth, it is something that comes from the cosmos. And that's actually true in the MCU as well when you think about it. Before Agatha All Along, death actually has appeared in the MCU twice. First, in an engraving on the walls of the Morag Temple at the beginning of the first Guardians of the Galaxy film, actually better seen in the Collector's monologue on Nowhere later in the film, as depictions of death, entropy, infinity, and eternity surround the Infinity Stones. We got a labeled version of this in the Art of the Guardians of the Galaxy book that Marvel released. The other appearance of death in the MCU was as one of the cosmic entities in the chamber in Thor: Love and Thunder. These entities included Eternity, who was presiding over the front of the room, Uatu the Watcher, the Living Tribunal, the Celestial One Above All, Death, Eon, and Infinity. Now, many of these entities we have seen in other forms, like Beyond Eternity's statue was an ethereal space where Eternity's actual form resided. Technically, this version of Eternity transformed into Gor's daughter to make her the entity known as Love. Uatu the Watcher, obviously we've seen in the animated form in the What If series, as well as I Am Groot. The Living Tribunal, we saw a severed statue head of in the Void and the Loki series, but we also saw multiple Living Tribunals in some weird realm in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. We've seen other Celestials in Eternals and Thor: Love and Thunder. Eon, the entity that represents time, has not been shown. However, Ivan Vellani confirmed exclusively to us in an interview 1 year ago that in the Marvels, that moon upon which Dar-Ben digs up the other quantum band was, in an earlier version of the scene, the gravesite of Eon. So it's implying that even Eon, one of the cosmic entities, was ferried over to some cosmic entity afterlife by Mistress Death. So now Agatha All Along is showing Death's embodied form, and I think we can deduce from this that Death might not look like Aubrey Plaza Plaza everywhere in the universe of the MCU that her natural form is just a feminized body with a skull face. Aubrey Plaza's Rio Vidal is the form that Death takes on Earth and other humanoid civilizations. It's a face that she wears in order to not upset the soul that she is transitioning to the afterlife. But based on how Death works in the comics, which seems to be generally how Marvel is approaching the character here, Death and other cosmic entities of that status supersede all realities of the multiverse. So there isn't like a 616 Death and then a separate 838 Death. There's just one Death. And that's why A, she's super busy, and B, to keep up with all these transitions must not be bound by time. I think showing Death physically slicing through the backdrop of the Witch's Road is kind of a hint to that. Like, she can see through and cross through the borders of magical pocket realms and realities produced by mortals. Now, to be clear, Death itself is a different thing from the goddess of death, which is Hela in the MCU, both in Norse mythology and the Asgardian hierarchy of this universe. Gods and goddesses in the MCU are rooted in the mortal constructed spiritual belief networks to be representative avatars of various concepts that are important to that society of mortals. But the deities are not themselves the abstract concepts embodied, but I think we can safely assume that Death in the MCU and Hela probably have some kind of relationship. Like, that's not too hard to imagine. Today's video is sponsored by Blue Chew. Pretty soon, you're gonna be asked the toughest question of the year. What are you thankful for? And sure, you could phone in your answer with one of the classics, my health, my family, my career. Or you could say something really memorable like, I'm thankful for my newfound sexual prowess. Thanks, Blue Chew. Grandma, why are you making that face? Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in chewable tablets and at a fraction of the cost. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. It's super easy too. Just sign up at bluechew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. It's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, no waiting in line at the pharmacy. You can take Blue Chew anytime, day or night. That way you can plan ahead or be ready for whenever an opportunity arises. If you're skeptical or don't think you need it, try it free for a month and see. Blue Chew wants to help you have better sex. Discover your options at bluechew.com. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code New Rockstars at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's bluechew.com, promo code New Rockstars to receive your first month free. Visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information, and we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring this video. And one final rule that we must acknowledge is that Lady Death is the embodied concept of the process of death, which is a process. She's not the guardian of any singular afterlife or all of the afterlife options that deceased souls in the MCU transition into. So far, the MCU has introduced a variety of afterlives. To the Wakandans, there's the ancestral plane. To the Asgardian warriors who die in battle, like Heimdall and Jane Foster, there's Valhalla. To creatures like Rocket and Lila in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it took the form of a white limbo space. To believers of Egyptian mythology, like Stephen Grant, it's the Duat, the Field of Reeds, the Aru. And remember, in Moon Knight Episode 5, Tawaret, the Egyptian goddess of women and children, explains how all of these afterlives intersect.
This is the afterlife? The afterlife?
An afterlife, not the afterlife. You'd be surprised how many intersectional planes of untethered consciousness exist.
Yeah.
Like the ancestral plane. Oh, just gorgeous.
So the fact that all of them are connected suggests that there is one being that brings them all to these different options. Like there is some kind of roadmap that some being knows how to follow and just take different exits off of that path. Also, this term untethered consciousness, I think that helps us understand what Death is doing. She is severing that tether of consciousness from the soul to the body of this plane of existence and carrying those untethered souls to one of these afterlives. It's also why it's so important that Jack Schaefer and her writers depicted Death as a reflection of both the decay and the growth of life. Because Death only exists in existence as one of these cosmic beings of the multiverse, because death is just a necessary part of the cycle of nature for new life to grow. So based on all this information, I think we can revisit some memorable deaths in the MCU and draw some new implications about them. Starting with Thanos, the guy who in the comics has a pretty important relationship with death. We have seen Thanos die multiple times, decapitated in the opening act of Endgame, and then permanently dusted at the end of Endgame. Then an alt-universe 838 version of him in Multiverse of Madness, impaled by his own sword. And in animation, we saw a zombified Thanos in What If Episode 5 and sliced in half by Ultron in What If Episode 8. But when Thanos was decapitated by Thor, from his perspective, he probably found himself on the floor of his cottage on that garden planet, either while the Avengers were still there or sometime after they left, and then looked up to find Lady Death's skull-faced form waiting for him. But I think we have to assume that that conversation must have been contentious, because whatever words are exchanged between Death and the deceased occur outside of linear time. Death is too busy ferrying all dead souls across the multiverse for it to be stacked on top of each other. She's just someone who supersedes time, right? So she must know what's gonna happen to all the souls that Thanos snapped 5 years after this. And this version of Death, who met Thanos on the garden here, would have known what Thanos tasked her with by using the stones, the ferrying of half of all freaking lives of this universe, and what the Avengers, specifically Bruce Banner, would do 5 years after this in the future to ferry them all back. Like, I would love to see that scene at some point of Aubrey Plaza just screaming in his face to be like, why did you waste my time? Like, why did you give me all that pointless work to do? Now, from the perspective of the Dusted, this was a smooth, nearly seamless transition through time. Like, Monica Rambeau woke up from a nap in the same chair in that hospital. From Yelena Belova's perspective in the Hawkeye series, she was in that same bathroom, and the fixtures and wallpaper from her perspective just transitioned through time around her. That smoothness was all thanks to Death. She made it so that people who Dusted forgot what afterlife they had been ferried to. None of them would remember her face. In Agatha episode 8, Agatha tells Billy that 120 bodies are emptied out every minute. Emptied out struck me as something that she might have been repeating from Death, who complained about how busy her job is. 120 deaths per minute, we should note, is apocalyptically higher than the real world on Earth, where 105, 106 people die every minute. I think the number's higher in the MCU, where apocalyptic events are happening on planets across the galaxy beyond Earth and in the future and past. Every soul who has died in the MCU, Death was waiting for them. And that means all the casualties of all the conflicts we have seen in phases 1 through 5. So, all the casualties of the Battle of New York and Coulson, follow Death this way, please. Pietro Maximoff, gunned down by Ultron and Sokovia. Hey, don't worry, here's Death waiting for you. Wakandans like T'Chaka and Killmonger, Queen Ramonda, and yes, T'Challa. Here is Death to guide you to your ancestral plane. The pre-snap casualties of Infinity War, like Heimdall and Loki, who died on the Asgardian refugee ship. They were probably ferried by Death to Valhalla. Gamora, thrown over the cliff by Thanos on Vormir, probably was guided by Death to some Zeho-Beret-based afterlife. Vision in the Battle of Wakanda. Death was there for him too, and I am including Vision because I am assuming the Mind Stone endowed him with a soul, and that the version of Vision in WandaVision was really just a piece of Wanda's grief as opposed to Vision himself, unless you want to get real crazy here and theorize that the afterlife that Death took Vision to might have been Wanda's pocket reality hex. I know, it kind of blew your mind there. Now in Endgame, Natasha Romanoff on Vormir, she probably sat up from that puddle and saw Death waiting for her. Now with Natasha and Gamora, there probably was some comment about the visual similarity between the Lady Death that they met here and the Soulstone Keeper that stood up at the top of the mountain that they fell from. And that's because both the Infinity War team and Jack Schaefer on Agatha acknowledged that Red Skull in Infinity War in Endgame was based visually on Lady Death in the comics, and that on Agatha they didn't want Rio Vidal for that show to look too much like Red Skull from those movies. Also, we should note that Nebula described the planet of Vormir as this.
What is Vormir?
A dominion of death. At the very center of celestial existence.
A dominion of death. Yeah, I think this is a place where Death would rule over, and that she has a special connection to the Soul Stone, and that Red Skull, like Hela, would be some other being that was tasked to serve her. We should also look at the shocking recent deaths like Maria Hill in Secret Invasion, or Aunt May Parker in Spider-Man No Way Home, or MODOK in Quantumania, and the Illuminati of the 838 universe and Multiverse of Madness. A form of death was ready to take each of them to some afterlife beyond. And that includes Jane Foster in Thor Love and Thunder, a similar transition as the Wakandans, except for her, the exit point was Valhalla. Now, when Lila died in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, would Death have taken the form of an otter? It's hard to say. The High Evolutionary experimented on these mammals to give them the intelligence and the souls of what he deemed to be bipedal higher life forms. So Death may have still looked like Death for her. Again, we don't really know. But let's end with Tony Stark's death scene, which in retrospect is very interesting if you consider that Death was beckoning to him.
Friday.
Life functions critically.
Tony. Look at me. We're gonna be okay. You can rest now.
Interesting. Play that again.
Tony. Look at me.
When Pepper Potts tells Tony to look back at her, where was he looking? Had he been looking off to the side because he was seeing something, someone calling to him? Now, obviously, when Robert Downey Jr. shot the scene, the actor and the endgame filmmakers were not imagining Lady Death or Aubrey Plaza in the character's eyeline. I mean, Aubrey Plaza is known to sneak onto many film sets and screw with people, but that didn't happen here. But I do think that when many of these Marvel actors shoot their death scenes, especially Robert Downey Jr. here, they always include a little moment where they untether from consciousness and look beyond the people around them to focus their gaze on something that we cannot see or comprehend. It's what Hugh Jackman emoted in his death scene in Logan, replayed in Deadpool and Wolverine.
This is what it feels like. This is what it feels like.
That's what it feels like. And what I loved about Hugh Jackman's read of that is that he was reacting to words written in the screenplay by James Mangold, Scott Frank, and Michael Green, the exposition that called this moment, quote, a flicker of wonder. Is that flicker of wonder now Death's green torch? All of these deaths show these actors reacting to something wondrous, something natural and beautiful, something abstract. And now we know what that thing was. I want to thank Clutchlicious on Reddit for first posing this question. Comment down below with your thoughts on this. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.